Hi folks, welcome back to the module on taking responsibility from a faith. We're on week 6 this week. We're going to talk about fasting and some more intense prayer. But before we do that, let's just recap and see how you're getting on. So far we've built up quite a few challenges and things to be doing and programs and things to learn. So let's go back and have a look. How have you been getting on with the reading? We should have read 50 chapters by now. So if you're doing Genesis, you should have finished Genesis. So how's that been going? Have you been enjoying reading? Have you learned from the stories? If you're doing stories, it's certainly a different kind of reading than if you're reading teaching and programs. And sometimes if you're doing teaching and programs and more detailed thought, then we need to read less. You can get a lot from a few verses in some of the epistles and things like that. Whereas reading a story, if you pick out a few verses, you don't even get the whole story. And maybe you've missed out on things. So I hope you're getting on well with it and enjoying it. And that you've found praying something that you've enjoyed. If you've been working with your prayer sheets, you should be onto your second sheet now. We're into the next month. And as you're doing that, you should be starting again, and it lets you try some different prayers, some different things to pray for. I think it's nice. I enjoy the change of a month and starting new thoughts and thinking about different things to pray for. Not that there aren't things that I want to consistently pray for, but sometimes we want to change it up. So I hope you've been enjoying that too. We were thinking about accountability and fellowship. Has the accountability with others helped you with these things? What about the memorizing verses? Have you talked them over? Do you know any verses yet? You should have 5 or 6 maybe in your head, hopefully, from the program. So I hope that's been going well. And as we were thinking last week about character, maybe as you've been putting it in on your sheet, you've been thinking about that. So we want to see God working in our lives. And part of that is us pursuing him as well as him pursuing us. In any relationship, both parties pursue each other, or it doesn't really work. Isn't that the case? So I think some of these things are about us pursuing him as he pursues us. One of the things that we don't often do is fasting, and we're going to talk about that today. When I was a student, I did a survey of many of the Christian students and asked how many of them have read the whole Bible, how many of them regularly fast, how many minutes a day would they pray, and so on and so on. One of the things that surprised me is how few of them had fasted for faith reasons. Occasionally to raise money for something, but not for faith reasons. And it asks the question, what is fasting and what is it for? And do Christians really do it? So we're going to have a look at that today. Let's have a look quickly then at the question, what is fasting? Well, essentially, it's going without food. You'll see different stories. We'll look at Bible stories and fasting in a moment, and you'll see that a number of them fast for different lengths of time. In the different stories, they stop eating food for a period of time. When we say what is fasting, we say it's going without food, and it kind of asks the question, why? What good does it do? There can be health benefits to fasting intermittently. And people sometimes fast for that reason, to look better. But that's not why we're doing it. These are faith reasons that we have for fasting. So what is fasting? Well, it's going without food for a reason. Usually there's something serious that we want to pray about. Fasting is a time of intense prayer where we set aside our time and our appetites for an appetite for prayer and spend time doing that. So I'll ask the question, I guess, have you fasted? Have you tried that? And whether you have or not, we're going to try it as part of the program and give you a chance to think about that. So what we're talking about is not eating food for a period of time and devoting that time to prayer. So what is fasting for? Well, fasting, as I said, is usually for a reason in the Bible. We'll look at some examples. But what's it for? It's showing God you're serious. It's saying to God, well, I am serious about this. I'm focused on this. I want this to happen. I need to know answers to this. And so it's very often connected to specific issues. We want an answer from God for something, so we fast and pray. We need to know God is in something, so we fast and pray. We're making a major decision, so we fast and pray. So we're going to think about some of the Bible examples. We'll see Jesus fasts a number of times, but the most obvious one is when he's tempted in the wilderness. Just after he has been baptized, he goes out into the wilderness to pray and is tempted and tested by the devil, partly to prove to all the principalities and powers that as God, Jesus is not going to be tempted to sin. He's not going to succumb to temptation. And he fasts for 40 days. I don't know how someone can go without food for 40 days. I certainly can't. You can tell by my roundness. But Jesus spent 40 days praying and fasting. He must have had water and must have had that to survive, but he's gone a long time without food. We see Daniel fast. We talk about Daniel chapter 1 where he decides only to eat vegetables, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in chapter 9, Daniel realizes that after 70 years in exile, the Jews were supposed to go back to Israel, and he prays and fasts and repents and says to God, I am sorry and my people are sorry and we have failed, but you promised to return us home. And I pray that would happen, and I'm praying and fasting for that specific reason. Nehemiah is another one. Whenever his friend comes a long way, he's living in the Babylonian kingdom as a cupbearer to the king. And whenever his friend comes from Jerusalem, he says, oh, how is Jerusalem getting on? How's it doing? How are we doing here? And the guy says, not good. Jerusalem's a mess. The walls are broken down. Thieves and robbers are everywhere. The people are scattered. There's no hope in Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah fasts and he prays. And he says to God, help me do something about this, or you do something about this, or what can I do to fix this? The people are lost. David's another one. After he had his issues with Bathsheba, seeing her, and he's sinned by taking her. Nathan accuses him. He said, you killed Uriah so you could steal his wife, and God is not pleased with you, and your child is going to die. And so David fasts and prays to ask God to forgive him and to heal his son. And God does not heal his son. But David spent that time in prayer and fasting, asking God to heal his son. He said, it's my fault, not my son's. But he didn't get the answer that he wanted. Finally, we're going to have a quick look at Mark chapter 9. So if you've got a Bible there, let's have a read at Mark chapter 9. This is a story where the disciples had been asked to heal somebody, and they hadn't been able to do it. Jesus had sent them out to heal people and to drive out demons and things like that. So let's start in verse 17. A man in the crowd answered Jesus, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So he said, well, bring him here, because you guys haven't got what it takes. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus. "Everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. You think, what's this got to do with fasting? After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciple asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer and fasting." It might say in your Bible just prayer, but then in the notes it says some manuscripts prayer and fasting. And he's talking about this sort of seriousness of prayer that comes with fasting. Even if it's not about the fasting, it's about that seriousness of prayer, about saying to God, "This is serious. I need you to have a serious answer." He's equating belief with fasting. He's saying, well, if you just believed enough, you could move the mountains and throw them in the sea. He's saying that sort of belief comes with depth of faith and prayer and fasting. And so there's an element of fasting that is about seriousness and about real serious faith, about faith that changes things. It's not asking God to do something for you or instead of you. It's not asking God to help you do something. It's asking God to do something with you together. So, have we tried fasting? Let's think a bit about what this might look like in our context. One of the things about fasting is that it's the sort of commitment that says, I want this to happen. And it's focusing on one thing. I was thinking about when I was a child. My dad could be working in the garage. He had a bit of a workshop out in our garage, and I could run in and say, "Can I have a football? Daddy, I need a bike." And I would go in and I would say, "Daddy, I want an ice pop and or an ice cream, and Daddy, can I have a ball to play tennis?" And I could go in and out, and often our prayers are like that. We rush into God, we ask for something we want, we rush out again. We then go back with some other request, something else going on. But to stop and spend time with him and say, "Look, what can we do about this? This is a thing that I need an answer to. I need to sit with you until I've got an answer to this." You see how that's a different kind of prayer? It's not confusing or mixed up. You're asking about one thing. And one thing about fasting is to be focused, to keep plans simple. I want an answer to this. What can we do about this? And to emphasize it. Along with that, fasting should be something that makes you uncomfortable. If you don't eat for a day, your stomach rumbles and it growls and it moans and complains. and it's uncomfortable. And that reminds you that you're doing this, you're committed to this, because you want to build your faith and you want God's answer to these things. Some people have medical conditions that make fasting difficult. So it shouldn't be life-threatening. We don't fast until, this is not a hunger strike. This is not the sort of fasting where our life is at stake. But it should be uncomfortable. So when people say, well, how long do I fast for? Well, that's up to you. It should be a time that is uncomfortable. For me, it's very easy to get up in the morning and not eat till tea time. That's not fasting. That's easy. That's my routine sometimes. For others, it might be missing breakfast is a massive deal. So what is it that we can do? For some, it might be a day. For others, it might be 24 hours, 48 hours. For some, it might be a different kind of fasting thing. We'll talk about alternatives in a minute. But we'll try and find a place where it's uncomfortable, to show God that we're not limited by our comfort and by the zones that we find easy, that God is more important to us and his answer is more important than the food that we eat. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, that was his first answer. Man doesn't live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. So we'll try and find a way to fast that is uncomfortable, that takes a stretch for us. And it should be for a reason. In fact, it must be for a reason. There must be something specific that you're praying about and committed to getting an answer to. If we don't focus on something, fasting is another one of those toys. We're looking at tools that help us grow our faith here. And fasting is a tool that helps us, but only if we're focused on something, on getting an answer from God, on working out what to do about something. So it should be for a reason. If you can't not eat food, if that is physically dangerous for you, then there are alternatives. For some people, they fast from technology, from TV, from phones, from apps. For one day, they set aside all the technology and they say, look, or for 2 days or for 3 days, I'm going to not look at any videos or TikTok or anything like that. I'm going to stop and I'm going to pray. For some people, that's uncomfortable. It certainly isn't life-threatening, but it can be uncomfortable. And it's saying to God, I'm serious about this. It's not quite the same as not eating, but it's in the same grounds, the same idea. For others, it might be being alone, setting aside all the time that we run around with people and do things and are busy and active and social. For those of us who are very social, cutting out some of that social time, and retreats are very much a common thing for Christians now. The idea of setting aside quiet time, a big amount of quiet time, and not talking to people is another thing that we can do. What we're going to do for the module is this. This is week 6, and in week 10 we test all the different things that we've been doing. So if you've been doing the module and are enjoying it and are doing some of the other things, then what we'll do is say in the next 4 weeks, before week 10, try fasting. You set the scope of it, how long it takes. You set the goal, the reason that you're fasting. You consider what it is you're going to set aside. You decide what fasting for you is going to look like, and then try it. See if God helps you with these answers. Whenever they're picking new disciples, they would fast and pray. When they're sending out missionaries, they fast and pray. When the church needs to know what to do about building or about, then we fast and pray. And it's worth experiencing this, because once you've realized that God hears you and is more likely to answer you when you're being serious, then you can go back to him with some of the other things that are going on in life. So in the next 4 weeks, you take a time of fasting, and at the week 10, when we are testing each other, your accountability partner, you'll explain to them what you did for fasting. We're not going to say, oh, you went without food for 4 days, so you get X amount of marks. That's not what it's about. But it's about the trying of this more serious level of prayer, of committing to fasting and praying. So to summarize, fasting is going out without food to show God you're serious about something. And it's usually in the Bible a very specific issue that they're praying for and need an answer to. Maybe they're childless and they want a child. Maybe they have the people need something. Or maybe the land is broken, and they pray and they fast and they pray. We're going to try and do that over the next 4 weeks. Just at one point in the next 4 weeks, take time and do that and see how it goes. And we'll discuss it in week 10. Hopefully that's been helpful to you, and hopefully the actual fasting will be even more helpful to you.